Hello, everyone. Go ahead and get comfortable. Thank you for joining us tonight for History Happy Hour, and our topic is going to be on Father Boniface Hardin. Father Boniface Hardin was a priest, mentor, and activist who co-founded Martin University and whose impact on Indianapolis helped shape the lives of many. My name is John Kennedy, and I am the Specialist of Education and Engagement at the Indiana Historical Society. It is great to have so many of you here this evening. I will be going over a few details before passing the mic over to our speakers. At the Indiana Historical Society, we are Indiana's storyteller, connecting people to the past. We collect paper-based items such as books, paintings, letters, photographs, diaries, and more to tell Indiana's unique stories. We then find ways to share these stories through publications, exhibits, and events such as this one. Through these documents, we tell the diverse stories of Indiana and inspire a future grounded in our state's uniting values and principles. Tonight, we're going to learn about Father Boniface Hardin with our guests, Dr. Nancy Chism and Professor John Hardin. Dr. Nancy Chism is a Professor Emerita from Indiana University, and she is the author of Pickin' Cotton on the Way to Church, which details Father Hardin's life. Professor John A. Hardin is Professor Emeritus of History from Western Kentucky University, and he's one of the editors of the Kentucky African American Encyclopedia. Thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And tonight we're also joined by our moderator, Ray Boomhauer, who is our senior editor at Indiana Historical Society Press. Ray, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John. Glad to be here.
So before we get started, let me just go over how tonight's going to play out. For our event, Ray and our guests will talk for about 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions. If you have questions as we go along, please drop it in the question and answer section of your Zoom screen. We'll keep an eye on them and then pepper them in when we get to the second half of our program. If you would like to add anything to the chat box, don't forget to change your response to all panelists and attendees so we can see your thoughts. Keep an eye on the chat where I will be dropping in links and URLs throughout the conversation. And don't worry if you miss one, they will be delivered to your inbox in a follow-up email tomorrow morning. This program is being recorded. You can catch the replay on our website, indianahistory.org, in the coming weeks. And if you enjoy our program, please consider coming back for more events such as this one. Our next History Happy Hour is on March 17th, where we talk with Michelle Marino about her book on women's roller derby. Sign up for that at indianahistory.org for more information about this and other virtual offerings coming up throughout 2022. All right, Ray, take it away.
Thank you, John, and thank everyone for being with us tonight. I was happy to say that I was able to work with Nancy on her biography of Father Hardin. And proud to say that the Indiana Historical Society Press published that book in 2019. James Randolph Hardin, Father Hardin, later, was born on November 18, 1933. And Professor Hardin, I'd like to ask you to give a little background about your family, your father and mother, and some of the challenges that the Hardin family faced living and working and growing up in the Louisville, Kentucky area in the 1930s, the World War II era, and at that particular time in our country's history.
Very briefly, one of the things to remember, Boniface, and it is Boniface Hardin, like the Germanic Boniface. Boniface, when he was young, he was James Randolph Dwight Hardin, came from a family that had deep roots, not so much in Louisville, but in Bardstown, which is considered the Catholic Holy Land. That's an area of Kentucky where Catholics are very strong, still are. And the family was one of those that participated in the building of a proto-cathedral in Bardstown. If you know anything about Bardstown, today it's the bourbon capital of Kentucky. But in addition to that, it was also a very religious community. So as African-American Catholics, they had a difficult time because they were attending Mass in a segregated section. And at one point, the family said, we want our own church. So the Hardin family was very active within the church. My mother was Baptist, but when she married Dad, they converted. One of the things that you need to remember about Bardstown as a small community, everyone knew everyone else. My grandfather was well known, and the Hardin family and our cousins and the Payne family, they were very active in their community. So when Boniface, or at the time he was James Randolph, or Randolph as we called him, and others called him Randy, he decided to become involved with the church. He wanted to be a priest. The notion was that he could not go to seminary in Kentucky because at that particular time, the state of Kentucky had something called the Day Law in 1904, which said segregation was legal, and the church wanted to abide by the law. So his choice was to go to an all-Black seminary in Mississippi, or the other option was not too far in Indiana.
Mhm.
So the family was able to get other Black Catholics, not only in Bardstown, but when they moved to Louisville around World War II, they were simply proud of the fact that here was a young African-American man wanting to be a priest. The thing you got to remember, there were very few Black priests at that time. And so for him to go to St. Meinrad in southern Indiana, a very interesting sort of place, because it was, every time you go to St. Meinrad, it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful area of southern Indiana. But it's also sort of unique in the sense that you're in a different world, very beautiful world, very peaceful world, but it is very white and very few Blacks there. So when he was there with a few other Black seminarians, it was always a struggle and challenge. So when he would come home, you would see that it was glad for him to visit, but at the same time, he understood that he had to work out that relationship of being a Black Catholic, aspiring to be a priest, very rare position across the country. At one point, there was no more than 80 at any one time. So the family was very proud of him, but he also had responsibilities in the sense that he represented every Black Catholic parish in Louisville and other parts of Kentucky that sort of gathered some funds to pay for a seminary education. And of course, the book reflects that. He had to pay for it. He had to work. He had to, in a sense, work summer jobs to help pay for his seminarian education. We're very proud of him. Family was very proud of him. But at the same time, he, in a sense, had to understand that being Catholic and Black, you had two challenges. The challenge of being Catholic, being African-American, coming from Kentucky, which was one of those states that did not officially devolve itself of slavery until the 1970s, even though there was, it's a long story. I don't want to get in that. It's another whole class. But the whole point is,
he's facing a lot of challenges and
sure,
a lot of pressures on him. What was it about the Catholic Church that had him decide, I'm going to give my life to it, I'm going to declare this vocation? What drew him to that?
I think it was the fact that there was some peace. There was an expectation that God would recognize him as a human being, that he would not be discriminated against in the eyes of God. And particularly in the church, there were a number of priests that, in a sense, gave him some hope that as he moved through the process of the priesthood and prayer and study, that he could, in a sense, do the spiritual mission, but at the same time represent his family, his community, in sort of doing that. There was always a sense of commitment to this religious experience, particularly in the family. Remember, he was the second generation of Hardins coming out of Bardstown that had that strong Catholic tradition in Bardstown. It was just there. So it was his father. His grandfather was sort of interesting. Again, that's another whole biography on Will Hardin. Very famous picture. He was in Ripley's Believe It or Not, because both my dad and his father worked at the same restaurant for 25 years. And grandfather worked there for 50, dad worked there for 25. Right. And so they were in Ripley's Believe It or Not. So there was some notoriety. But the point was that Boniface, or as he transitioned from Randolph to Boniface, felt that the church was an opportunity to do something positive, spiritually and for the community indirectly, by being that presence from Kentucky. I think he was only the second African-American from Kentucky, and for many, the first time they would see a Black priest in a church which is normally dominated by white priests. This Black figure was sort of unique. And so he decided to do this, to take all of the challenges, all of the obstacles that was going to be presented to him, there was always a suspicion, well, you're Black and you're not equipped to deal with the church. And as the youngest of the four brothers, remember, I was born in 1948, and by that time he had left home and started the process. So I got to know my brother when he came to visit as we got older, and as I finished undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral program. We sort of chatted, and we I understood just studying all the things, all of the difficulties that he went through, more so than in the book. There's a lot of things in the book that explain that, but there's a lot of personal things that he had to go through.
Right.
And I could empathize with, as an academic, as an administrator at a college, I could understand where he was, in a sense, going through. And his experience growing up in Bardstown, then in Louisville, which was still very much segregated,
Right.
very much two cities, really three cities, Black, white, and then other, and as others came in. And so at that particular time, if you were Black, you couldn't really tear it down. What you had to do was learn how to address it and navigate so that you could accomplish something.
Right.
And I'm going to slow down because I can talk too long.
Okay. John, we throw up that slide picture of Father Hardin early on. Let me start that. Yeah. Nancy, I want to go to you. Let's go back to that first one. There he is at St. Maynard Monastery. Nancy, I want to go to you and ask and get some background on how you first met Father Hardin. We know, of course, John's his brother. That's it. But how did you get to know him, get to know Father Hardin?
Well, my first acquaintance with Father Boniface was through attending Mass. I'm Catholic as well, at the Carmelite Monastery, where he came occasionally to say Mass. And I didn't think too much of it until I learned that he was president of Martin University. I loved his sermons, but I am in higher education, so I taught a class that had a section on the culture of higher education. And I always thought that Martin University had a marvelous culture. So I invited him to come. Later on, and we became friends. Later on, he was also a person who came to the Franciscan Hermitage, where I attend Mass now. And we would always have breakfast afterwards together. He and Sister Jane, his companion and collaborator, would come and we would talk. And so when he ultimately had his stroke in 2011, I visited him in the nursing home. And at one point, he turned to me and he said, I'm just frustrated that I wasn't able to get the story done. And I said, what story? And he said, the story of my life and Martin University. And he looked at me in a way that said, and so I said, sure, I will try to do it. So that's how I came to meet him. I only knew him in the last 10 years or so of his life.
So Professor Hardin, your brother's kind of stuck at St. Maynard for like 6 years, I think it was, kind of serving in an administrative role in accounting, I believe it was, assistant treasurer at St. Maynard. But finally he gets an opportunity to come to Indianapolis at the Holy Angels Church. Do you remember the challenges he faced here in Indianapolis when he first arrived?
Well, let me just try to, from a distance, we had conversations. The challenges he had was to bring his experiences, first of all, as an associate pastor. He wasn't the pastor.
Right.
And he came from that setting at St. Maynard, which was very well organized, structured. You reported to an abbot, you did certain things, you had a job. But when you get to the city, Indianapolis is the state capital. It has all of these sort of interesting compartmentally designed areas of the city. It's a marvelous city. It has the 500. It has a number of communities, a great business atmosphere. But it also had a legacy long-term legacy of having a Klansman as a governor. It has had some racial issues. And my understanding is that there were certain things that were happening in the city, particularly in the 1950s and 1960s, where things were changing. This was the era of a change. He had to realize that because you were Black and a priest didn't really so much mean anything, you were still Black first, then a Catholic priest. And what he had to do was to come to reality that being a Christian didn't mean that you were going to have the same sort of respect, even though you were ordained in an office, a spiritual office, that Catholics should immediately respect you. It wasn't that way. So what he had to do was to, in a sense, get in touch with the Black community. When he would come to visit us in Louisville, and I was still living in Louisville, he'd come to visit, he was very much in touch, still calling back, what's going on in the city? He would visit us at home, but first thing he would do is say, okay, what's going on? He did not want to leave his new home, which was Indianapolis. He wanted to know every single thing that was going on. And when Martin Center was established, Martin Center College and all of the things around Martin, they became, in a sense, might say, the fifth brother. But it was very good. I was very glad to see him do that because he became in touch with what I had to deal with in Louisville. My neighborhood in 1968 had a riot that was 1/2 block away. And this was a period of real challenge for me to be in an area that had real turmoil. It was a good neighborhood, but at one particular moment, things blew up. He wasn't there when that happened. But I think he realized, and I realized, that this was a different period. Because you were a priest meant that you had spiritual guidance and strength to do things, but at the same time, you had to deal with people who say they're spiritual, but acted very unspiritual and unreligious, and some of them were even among the religious. Racism knows no bounds. Racism, you could be a very holy person on one hand, but abiding by racial laws, mores, on the other hand. As one who's sort of written about it in my books and examined it over the last 40 years, I retired after 44 years of teaching at the higher ed level. One of the things that always bothered me was people said, I don't believe all this happened. Well, it did. And it happened in many places, in places you wouldn't think. So Boniface, in a sense, as he transitioned from that very secure environment of St. Meinrad to a much more challenging, busy, great city that Indianapolis is, Circle City, it's fantastic. But at the same time, with all of these things going on, you had each of these communities asking for him. They wanted him to lead. They wanted him to, in a sense, have a role and interact with the local community. The local community there wanted someone with his background to sort of step out and say, let's see what we can do to change things. Change agents are powerful, but they also take risks. And I think, Nancy, you can deal with some of those risks with Martin. And I'm not gonna get into those because the book does a great job in telling that story.
Well,
Nancy,
you know,
let's-
when he was at Holy Angels,
Right.
another conflict was with the church. The priests were telling him, you're not a social worker, you're supposed to hear confessions, say mass, whatever. But he was so upset with the poverty, police brutality, segregation in schools and so on, the building of I-65 through Holy Angels, that he became more and more radical. And it came to the point, this may be a future question, that the police were so upset with him that they asked the Archbishop to send him back to St. Meinrad. So his own church was a thorn in his side as far as what he felt he had to do at that point. Luckily, that was rescinded. But Boniface at that point felt that he could no longer stay in the parish. He'd be under the thumb of the administration the whole time.
When he was at Holy Angels, Nancy, and the issues that you raised, How did he deal with them? How did he interact with local officials trying to affect change in the community?
Well, as John has indicated, it was the era of civil rights struggle. So they had Sister Jane put together a drum and bugle corps, and they brought those to the circle downtown for the War on Poverty March. They met with public officials about I-65 all of the time. They were down at the mayor's office all of the time. So he did try to work through the system. At the same time, he felt that he had to defend those who were being oppressed by the system.
He also was a towering figure at that time, and he seemed to have a particular effect on his parishioners and the people who came to the church.
He would go and break up fights in the streets, and his stature is a tall man, a big man, and he was an imposing man. And as the photos would show, his hair grew from a close cropped hair to big afro, then the beard. And more that showed his radicalism. His physical presence became more radical. Again, there he is, New Creek's there. He
with his afro,
65, 66. Yeah, he came with a shorter haircut. And then we get the picture in the dashiki. He found that he couldn't always work with his Protestant and Jewish and other clerics in the Roman collars. So he began to wear the dashiki. And that picture was taken in 1970, I believe. To the right, you have the picture of Boniface later in life when he did his Frederick Douglass reenactments. People always told him he looked like Frederick Douglass, and he kind of acted that way too.
Yes, he faced a kind of a double prejudice you point out in your book, not only because of his race, but also because of his faith. That there's an anti-Catholic feeling that seemed in Indianapolis at that time as well. Mm-hmm. Finally, what drove him, do you think, to decide to start Martin Center, to leave Holy Angels and break out into this new endeavor?
Well, his first endeavor was Martin Center. And in the first 3 years of Martin Center, I looked at the statistics, 69,000 people were touched through workshops on racial justice, through a museum that celebrated the achievements of African Americans, through radio shows, weekly radio and TV shows, 2 feature-length films. They were enormously productive for racial justice. And then he and Sister Jane decided that the next step eventually was to expand upon this by making access to higher education more affordable and more palatable for many of the African Americans in the communities by establishing a different kind of institution. So they founded Martin Center College, which became Martin College, and then finally with graduate programs was called the wonderful Martin University that we have today.
Professor Hardin, it seems that education was an important part in your family from the beginning. I know your mother was a teacher, your father was a teacher for a time before he went into other professions. Can you talk about how that was so important to your family? Did that, you think, influences later activities with the Martin Center and the Martin University as well?
Well, I think what Dad and what Mother both did was to instill in all of us a sense of learning, an ability to find out for yourself. They both earned their degrees in 1929 from Kentucky State Industrial College. And at that particular time, the only public institution you could earn a degree in Kentucky was Kentucky State. And so they had their certificates, lifetime teaching certificates, and they taught. And in schools, at a certain point, by World War II, Kentucky had sort of a difficult time in terms of paying teachers. It was easier to work. He worked for the railroad. He made more money with the railroad than teaching school. So Mother became the person who took care of us boys, and he worked, and they gave up teaching. But the sense of learning, the sense of growing your skills continued with us. So they had that tradition. Some of it came from simply growing up in Bardstown. Bardstown did not have what you would call a large school. Bardstown was typical of Kentucky. They had segregated public schools called training schools. They were called training schools because you were trained to have a skill. So they took what education they could get, but went beyond it. There was a sense within the family that you would go forward. Now, all of us, my oldest brother is still remaining. He earned his degree from Bellarmine University, so did I. I had another brother who finished high school, went into the military, and raised a family. He's now deceased, Bill. But he didn't stop learning. He said even after he retired from working as a lineman for the gas company, he still continued to learn on his own. So there was a sense that education was an ongoing process in all of us. And that, I think, was instilled in us by our parents. And so we took that in whatever we did to become as successful as possible. But there was also a sense of taking those learning skills that we learned from our parents and put it in our daily lives and share it with others. And that's the good thing. We have a tradition that education is one of the most important things that you can have. All of us completed as much as we wanted to. I finished a PhD, but it didn't stop. I'm still learning. Degrees simply mean you have a certificate, but it's what you learn beyond the certificate that's most important. How to be a good human being, how to be respectful of people, how to treat people as you would want to be treated. And so I think both of our parents instilled in us that. Boniface had it. He took that plus the religious experience and put those into play. And as Nancy pointed out, he interacted with others who weren't necessarily Catholic, but they were good people. It didn't matter what denomination you had, but how were you as a human being? Were you working with the community? Were you doing good things? And I think that was the most positive thing that could come out of that learning environment we had at home. And it carried over, I think, to all of us.
Part of Boniface's fascination with learning was, or fascination with the Catholic Church, was learning Latin. He was a server at Mass, and he could recite the whole Latin Mass when he was a young boy. And as you know, he was a linguistic scholar. He knew so many languages. He loved languages, but he also loved astronomy, the classics, philosophy, theology. He was a real scholar.
Nancy, I mean, it seems like a Herculean task to start a university from the ground up. How did Sister Jane and Father Hardin manage to do that? You know, I just think it's just amazing achievement. How did they go about raising the money and getting the students there? And it was just, how did they do it? I'm just amazed about that part of his life.
Well, Boniface's simple answer is God loves fools and babies. But yeah, they started real small. They had a place on College Avenue where they eventually had the Sickle Cell Center, the Institute, the African American Institute, all of those things in houses. And they had just about 4 students to begin with, and he and Sister Jane were the teachers. Then they began, as they had more students, to put classified ads in papers for professors or teachers to teach certain subjects. And it just grew like topsy. Everybody who knows Boniface knows the touch he had. And when he and Sister Jane would go to McDonald's or whatever, he would say to the server, "Don't you think you really need to go to college?" And so he was an immense recruiter. He just pulled people from the byways, and pretty soon they were bursting at the seams there. And luckily they found, or they fell into a deal with the Archdiocese to buy the original St. Francis de Sales plant over on the east side where Martin is still located.
Were there certain institutions or individuals in Indianapolis who were a particular help for the project that could always be dependent upon when aid was needed?
Yeah, at first IUPUI was very helpful. But Boniface and Jane looked far. They had a person by the name of Dr. Cheek at Antioch College, because one of the things they were very interested in doing in a new way was to accept life experience and give credit for life experience to students who came. And he was a person who was connected with the Union of Experiential Colleges. And so they actually incorporated that. Sister Jane was sort of the pedagogical expert. She was the principal at Holy Angels. So she involved Malcolm Knowles, who was a higher education scholar interested in the way you teach adults being different. It was called andragogy rather than pedagogy. And so Martin was going to be that kind of school. So they looked far and wide for expertise. Malcolm Knowles became enamored of the place, and he would consult for free, fly in and help them out. And they found out pretty soon that they could get accredited. And after they were accredited by the state, they then got the regional accreditation, and things really began to roll at that point.
Yeah, a lot of hard work, it seemed, and a little bit of luck from time to time. Can you talk a little bit about the like that? There's one story from your book I really liked about I think there were $20,000 in debt, and tell that story.
They were doing the accounting. This is at the new plant, and they were $20,000 short. And Sister Jane opened an envelope on the table, and lo and behold, it was a donation. But also the interplay between these two. When they went over to the plant, one of my favorite stories is there was the old church that had been vacant for a while, and they walked in, and there was bird guano all over the place, leaks, soil, everything. And Boniface took one look at it, and he said to Jane, "Janie, isn't this marvelous?" Now, she was the person who was going to have to get the staff to clean it up and shape it up, but he had the vision. Like, this could be a performance center, is what he thought.
He always seemed to be a presence too for the students, and someone the students could go to when they had problems.
Yeah. That's what students always said. Martin was like a family, being at Martin University. I think it still is to some extent, where people feel comfortable, feel that they're in their element.
Overall, do you think that he believed that the Martin University was his greatest achievement, or is there something else in his life that he looked back on with particular fondness? I'll ask that from both of you. You both might have different answers.
Go ahead,
Would you like
Nancy.
to go first, John?
Well, I sort of missed the question. I was trying to find something, and I just found it. Just put it in the chat. But
Okay, it was what would Boniface say was his greatest achievement? And I think he worked at Martin for 30 years as president, and I do think that the lasting impact on Indianapolis came through the work of Martin Center and Martin University, in the people that they touched. The communiversity was his idea, that over on the east side, Martin would be a hub of culture and goodness, and even medical help and so on. So I do think he poured his whole heart and soul into that endeavor, he and Sister Jane.
I would say his greatest legacy, not only was it Martin, but in the sense that he brought the community not only to Martin, but also to make some changes. It wasn't about him, it was about everything else. One of the people in the chat wanted to know, what does Boniface mean? It means doer of good. And in a sense, that became his focus. Whatever he wanted to do, he wanted it to be for the good. Martin, of course, is named for two Martins. Martin de Porres, a saint who sort of dealt with people of color, and also Martin Luther King. So he looked at Martin representative of people who were doing good, not bad. And all too often, educational institutions, one of my alma maters recently did not do good. And that was the University of Michigan. They had an individual who left a legacy of doing some very bad things to a lot of people. So Martin, what he wanted Martin to have as a legacy for Indianapolis, for Indiana, and for people of all races. Yes, it focused on Blacks, but correct me, Nancy, if I'm wrong. Martin welcomes everybody.
Of course
It's
it
not-
does, yes.
And so what he wanted to do was to make sure that everybody received good things from what the institution was about. And if he can do that, then it's leaving a legacy of good things for the people of Indianapolis, for the people of Indiana, and the people of the country. If Martin and everything he did changes things positively, I think his legacy is a good one.
Before
One
we
of the
get to
things he always said was, when people say you're a great man, that's good. When they say you're a great priest, that's really special. So we
Mhm.
can't leave out that he
Correct.
felt being a priest was his primary role.
Right.
Before we get to some of the questions in the chat and from our audience tonight, I want to ask you about what drew him to Frederick Douglass and doing many programs about Frederick Douglass. Nancy, I know there's a similarity in looks, of course, but there's something about Douglass's life that really attracted him.
Yeah, of course. When they were putting together the materials for this Museum of African American History at Martin Center, they made several trips to the Frederick Douglass House in Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
And of course, I think he was prompted by the fact that he was always told he looked like Frederick Douglass. But yes, Frederick Douglass was a great orator. He was very important in the history of African Americans and the fight for racial justice. And I believe that he was attracted to his person. He loved to portray events in his life, several of which were in Indiana. Frederick Douglass was actually injured in a fracas when he came in Indiana. And he kind of rewrote a lot of those scenes to make them speak to what he wanted to do, what he felt Indiana wanted. So Frederick Douglass events at Martin would involve anachronisms. He would have Frederick Douglass talking to Martin Luther King or others. And I think to him, Frederick Douglass was a sort of alter persona.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Douglass had a number of issues. He had several wives, but the point was, on one hand, he was a supporter of the Civil War, but on the other hand, towards the end, he suddenly realized things were not getting good. So Douglass was not always well liked, but he had to do what he thought was right. And in the 19th century, it was tough being, quote, a Black leader. You were always told to be a good representative of your race. And if you said anything that conflicted with the status quo, then you were doing something bad. Well, if you had to do some conflicting, there was a reason for it. Things needed to be changed for the good. And Douglass was one of those that did not hold his tongue. And he decided to leave his mark, and he did. Douglass is one of those that's not been studied enough. There are books, there are biographies, but nonetheless, Douglass did leave his role and his mark in history.
Father Hardin left the earth with a lot of accomplishments and things to be proud of. Nancy, do you think there's anything that you look back with regret that he wanted to do but didn't accomplish, or regrets of things he didn't do in his life?
Well, I told you about the major regret that I helped to address.
Right.
He thought that in his retirement, he would do a lot of writing. He was going to write sort of a reconciliation with the Catholic Church and talk about that issue. He was going to write poetry. He was going to write the history of Martin University in his own life. But his retirement was taken up with, as we know, the heartache that happened after he left administration when Martin had changed for a while, and he wasn't able to do that. So I think that was a regret. He also talked about how he looked as an older man on his younger ways of acting with public officials and others, and realized that the fire at that point might have been tempered to get a better result. So I think as we all do, we look back on how we behaved when we were younger and wish that we had been a little more wise. But of course, wisdom comes with age. So,
Professor Hardin, is there anything else that you can think of?
Well, probably some of the regrets having to deal with coming from home. One little interesting point, the diocese, from which he came, will now have an African-American archbishop in Louisville. And so I sort of wonder what he would have said that his home diocese now is in a sense under the charge of someone like him. And perhaps that's a regret that he did not see, but I think what he was in touch with was that fellow Black priests were starting to evolve and change. And I think he influenced some of those as well as some of his white fellow priests. He was in a sense changing the church, but he was also an advocate to the very end, a change being a positive thing. And if there were things that he did not like, and he told me he had some dislike of all the things in the church among some of his fellow priests who were not acting the way they were supposed to, particularly in terms of their behavior. And so he had that regret. He wished he could have changed it, but that was in God's hands. So he was still a priest. He was still a leader and an educator. He could do only what he could do as much as God would let him. And he did as much as he could to the very end. I remember being in one of his rooms and I saw the imam come and pray. I said, he knew that his life was not necessarily the church. He loved his church, but he also knew that he had to love all men, regardless of their religion, regardless of what they felt like. And I saw that, and it was really amazing. So from that point of view, I don't think he had regrets about that. He understood that his life was going to be for everybody, regardless of your religion, regardless of your race, regardless of your station in life. So he didn't have any regrets on that. He knew who he was and whose he was.
At the end, would you say he reconciled with those who he might have seen as done him wrong earlier in life?
I think so. It's not about seeing it in print. It's about what he said. I think he understood that those individuals who had things against him are going to have to pay for their misdoings. Forgiveness is a complex thing. I read in scripture about forgiveness. Forgiveness is one of those things that you have to deal with. You can forgive someone. It's on the other person that you forgave. They have to understand their error and move on. So I can see him, in a sense, dealing with that, but not forgetting that some of the things these people did, they were not right. But at the same time, he had to do whatever he could to make some changes so that in the future, those things don't happen again. I'm still sort of seeing that today with all of the chatter, public chatter about things, people being made uncomfortable. If you get a chance, Kentucky Educational Television has a video called An Uncomfortable Truth about Black Catholics in Kentucky. There's a lot of uncomfortable truths that we have to deal with, even today. And when we get past that fact that there are uncomfortable truths and move on to the future, perhaps all of us can change and live better.
There are at least two people that I can think of that Boniface reconciled with. One was Richard Lugar, with whom he tussled about I-65.
When he was mayor, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
Mayor Richard, when he was mayor. And in the end, he and Senator Lugar were close friends. The other was the Archbishop, who actually sent him, or tried to send him back to St. Meinrad. And he reconciled with him at the end too. He said he held no grudge against him. So Boniface was a very forgiving person.
Forgiveness.
Yes.
That's important. Is there something that you think, Nancy, Indianapolis could do to honor his legacy more, or is the Martin University honor enough for him?
Well, I think Martin does a very fine job of continuing on his work. And if you go to the Gadatorium at Martin, you see a larger than life picture of Boniface. They have not forgotten. But yes, I do think that we could probably do more in terms of showing some of the Frederick Douglass reenactments, making some of that stuff available. I'm very grateful to the Indiana Historic Society because you have the archives now, and other scholars can go and look at all these videotapes and things that we've put together, the 40 interviews. And I have to do a shout out to all of the people who actually helped make this book through giving their thoughts about Boniface, some of whom are with us today. But I think if we could do periodic displays or things like this, we need to keep his legacy alive and need to keep telling people about who he was, because it's been 10 years now since his death. And when you ask people around Indianapolis if they knew Father Hardin, you never get a quiet response. It's always, oh, I love that man. You know, people were very attached to him. But as people age and a new generation comes along, we won't have that kind of impression, and we need to find ways to do that, to keep it alive. And thank you for publishing the book. That's the other thing.
Book's great. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Professor. Go ahead.
I was just going to say simply, it's about what he said. They loved the man, but I think we should love what he was trying to say. So the man's important, but his legacy will be if people sort of adopt some of the things he said and remember, because it's very easy in the TikTok generation. It's only lasts a minute 30. So we have to remember and keep remembering what's going on.
Well, that's a good that's a great segue, I think, into showing the video of Father Hardin, and we'll see what he has to say. Let's roll that, John.
You'll love this.
No audio.
Oh.
Please. Where's the audio?
Are you muted?
Please put the
Let's
audio
see if
on.
that fixes it. We'll see if it was because I was muted.
That might be it.
Technology. You need the audio.
John, did you remember to push share sound when you shared?
I thought I had. Sorry about that, folks.
For those who are listening, you need to hear the audio and the video.
I think I know it by heart.
Someone asked where the book can be purchased. The best place would be at the history market here at the Indiana Historical Society. It's $24.95.
And that other place that begins with A.
Right.
Amazon. But Historical Society first.
There you go.
And everybody, you need to go and look in the mirror. Okay, you can take this with you. Go look in the mirror and say, I am good and I am beautiful. Okay, when you look in the mirror. And then don't stay there too long, because then you get to loving yourself and you'll say, damn. But we don't love each other. We don't love each other enough. We have to love ourselves. If you don't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. That's what it has to be. And we have to do that. And no technology can compare to one human brain. Take all the technology in the world and put it right over here and get any one of us in our brain next to it. That brain is still greater than all that technology. God made us an original. When you look in the mirror, you're going to have an original. There is no one else that looks like us. Similar, yes. But every time we look in the mirror, say, I am an original. You have to learn to say that. And once we understand that, we can change the world.
Amen.
This is some great comments and great things to think about. Let's see if there's any more questions in the chat. I think there's one, Nancy. Someone asked, who was the Indiana College formerly official who was a great supporter of Father Hardin? Is there anyone that springs to mind?
When Martin Center was transitioning to Martin Center College, there was a dean of the faculty whose name was Jack Boehner, who helped with a big grant to study the need for higher education for African Americans and to begin working toward Martin College. But there really has been a long history of collaboration between Martin College, Martin University now, and IUPUI, in that Martin students can use the IUPUI library, and there's a back and forth that has been really good through the ages. So it wasn't only that dean of the faculties, but the administration through the ages, Dean William Plater, others have always been very receptive to Boniface and his needs.
Great. Here's another question. Given the racism that he faced as a priest, did he encourage or discourage other Black individuals from entering the priesthood or religious service?
No. I don't think he discouraged anyone, because if you listen to what he's saying, it's an individual choice, and it's a calling. Anyone called to do that, you have to be willing to give up some things in order to accomplish some things. So I don't think that he, in a sense, provided them with his experiences, but every person's experience, just like he said in the video,
okay,
we're each unique. So if you're going to do that, you're going to have to use everything that you have and be willing to commit and do what you have to. And I got that sense from just talking to him over the years, over the phone, and when he would come to visit home. Towards the end, a lot of long 2-hour conversations on the telephone. Because at one point I was in the state of Washington, I was in the state of Michigan, state of Tennessee, went to school, and we had to carry on conversations. And so we had a number of those that were very helpful. And it's really about commitment to what you want to do for the good.
Nancy, do you believe the same?
Yes, I mean, he just tried to bring out the best in every person, and that's why there's a little story of a firefighter who came when there was a smoke problem at Martin College, I guess it was in those days, maybe it was Martin University. And it turned out to be Michael Sahir, who is an imam now, you know, and Boniface said, you need to have an education, you need to have the authority and the learning to be the best imam you could be. So he just wanted to bring out the best in people. And Michael did beautifully at Martin. He's an author, and he's a wonderful figure in the Indianapolis community today.
Well, Professor Hardin and Nancy, I want to thank you both for sharing your insights about Father Hardin this evening. I learned a lot, even though I worked on the book. So it was.
Did you want to grab one more question there?
Okay, how did he meet so many influential people?
Okay,
our Hall of Fame.
That one. There's also, did he reconcile with Saint Meinrad? I think that's an important one, and yes, he did.
Yeah,
he did.
We talked.
He forgave. They at first. There was a little tussle about whether he should come back or not, and half of the monks there felt that he was being disobedient. The other half supported him, but over time he reconciled, and he actually chose to be buried there. So his grave is down at Saint Meinrad. On the influential people, again, he just became very well known, and through that communiversity outreach at Martin University, many people were invited, and their pictures are in the book. Sister Jean Prejean, pious fighters, concert artists, and all. He got to know all of these people, as well as local officials.
Also mention that John mentions as well that on December 10th, tornadoes hit the African American Museum of Bowling Green, Kentucky. And if you'd like to help efforts to rebuild, please consider checking out their GoFundMe campaign. And there's a link in the chat. And I encourage everyone, if you can, to do all you can to support that worthy effort.
I'm the chair of that board. And so very much like Martin had its share of incidents, this was a tornado followed by a massive fire, but it's all good. It's what you got to do sometimes. You keep moving, and the same way with Martin. It's moving ahead, and we'll move ahead, and it's what you got to do.
I wish you luck in that effort, Professor.
Thank you.
I think John might have some words to say to end tonight's program.
Yeah. All right. This was a wonderful conversation. I would like to thank Ray Boomhauer, our moderator for this evening. And I would also like to thank our guests, Dr. Nancy Chism and Professor John Hardin. This was an amazing conversation. And also thank you to everybody who was in attendance. I really loved all of your questions. And I had also read the book, but I still learned so much. And thank you for providing that wonderful video clip. I think that really shows people who may have not had the chance to meet him personally, the chance to get to know him better. And I thought that he just summed up in 60 seconds, essentially, just very wonderful sentiments. If you're interested in the biography on Father Hardin's life, we have it available over at the Indiana History Society store. We've provided the links within the chat, but don't worry, you'll be receiving an email tomorrow morning with those links. If you enjoyed this program, please tune in for our next one. It'll be on March 17th, where we talk with Michelle Marino about her book on the subject of women's roller derby. We've also got some other great events coming up from the Indiana Historical Society. You can learn more about those on our website at www.indianahistory.org/visit/calendar. We will post this conversation to the IHS YouTube channel and our website in the coming weeks. In the meantime, if you'd like to visit any of our previous free programs, you can check out the History Happy Hour playlist on YouTube or at the link in the chat. If you missed your chance to donate or would like to make a further gift to support the Indiana Historical Society, please visit indianahistory.org/contribute/donate. Your donation will help us to continue to share Hoosier stories like this one. You will get an email from us tomorrow morning with all of these links and a survey included. It will take about 1 minute to complete, and we'd love to know what you thought about tonight's program and how we can make our programs better. Once again, to Professor Hardin, to Dr. Chism, thank you so much for showing up. To our wonderful guests, thank you for tuning in tonight. And thank you, Ray, for helping moderate tonight's discussions. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and I hope to see you next time.
Thank you.